Hello and welcome. Hello, Taylor. How are you?
Doing all right. How about yourself, David?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. It is getting towards the end of my day, so it's a nice way to end the day with a nice look at Kubernetes and spend some time with yourself. How are you today?
Doing well. It's yeah, just kicking off my day personally here. So I promise I know you're at the end of the day, but I'm gonna try and bring that caffeine and some of that good morning energy to to the stream today.
Awesome. That's definitely appreciated. That's for sure. So you are a developer advocate at HashiCorp, and very relevant for today, you were the 1.19 Kubernetes release team lead. Do you want to add anything to that and take it from there?
Absolutely. So 119, just kind of, I'll just kind of jump in and out of some topics on that front. But howdy, everyone. My name is Taylor Dolezal. I'm a senior developer advocate at HashiCorp, and really, really excited to talk to you today. Mostly going to be covering the 119 release and what that experience was like, some of the fun new features around that, and then just that whole release process. Honestly, David, was a wild experience. Beforehand, I was working at Walt Disney Studios on the SRE team, and helping with all the efforts on that front. So the 119 release, was one I believe the longest release that we've had thus far, between all of the Kubernetes releases that we've seen. And so, kind of navigating, jumping between jobs in that. All the wild things happening in the world. It was a marathon release, is what most of the team had said around that, which is absolutely true.
Yeah, definitely. So I wasn't actually aware that this was the longest release, but I guess there's been a lot of different factors in 2020 that may have contributed to that. I believe you've been in the release team a while now, right? How many releases?
Absolutely. So I started on the 114 was, I believe, the first release that I was on. And saw the shadow survey and then jumped in and got started with the communications team. So for those of you that aren't aware, the release team, it is one team, but it's broken into multiple different verticals. So we have, one grouping takes care of communications. Another one takes care of enhancements, for example, another documentation, CI signal. There are different groups that focus on different things throughout the course of a release. And so typically the release teams in the lower mid 30s. I think we had about, if I'm counting correctly, I think it was like 33, 34 people on the 119 release.
Yeah, I think people watching this will probably be a little bit surprised that, with the size of Kubernetes as an open source project, that it requires a lot of people and time and effort to actually get that release out the door. Um,
It's interesting too, because there are different special interest groups within Kubernetes, for those of you that aren't aware. And the special interest group just for the release handles that release, and then those subgroups. But there are other ones like SIG API machinery, SIG docs, and even more on that front too. So no shortage of people to ping or reach out to on Slack if you have a question about a feature that's going to make it or not.
And how have you found the release teams now? If you said 114 was your first, this is your fifth release, right? So you've experienced a lot of the roles, I guess.
Yeah, so I did take off the 117 release cycle, so that was, and kind of got to get some rest and relaxation away from that, because it does take a lot out of you. But really, really been fun to see how the group has evolved in the different ways in which we go about communicating with one another, and seeing all of the documentation and handoff processes get more and more mature from release to release. And honestly, it's in on my perspective, my bias, it has been a lot easier from release to release, and just kind of that talking with people, and even just again, it could have just been the stars aligning for me with the 119 team, but it just was so easy to work with everyone. Everyone was just so kind. Everyone was so upbeat. And because it's an open source project, that's you're not, there's no financial incentive, hence open source. Everybody's passionate about the project, and so they're bringing that passion to work with them every single day that you're working on that release. And so that really, that passion really powered this release. That's where the Accentuate the Paw-sitive title came from. And just it was fantastic group of people to work with, and everyone was just even if there was a little slippage here or getting some done early or late, everybody was just there, and it very much had that family feel to it, for lack of a better term.
That's awesome, and I was very curious about the Accentuate the Positive, so I'm glad that we kind of covered that. I think every release now that I've at least been visible to or I've been paying attention to, it's like the themes are always great, and those come from the release team leads, right? You were the one that accentuated the positive here, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just trying to do a good thing, pay it forward. Yeah, each of the releases has a theme that will come with it, which is chosen by the release lead. And then typically I don't think it's ever been disclosed before the release has gone live. But that's usually kept a secret, even not even told to the release shadows as well. And so sometimes they'll be like, hey, what do you think? There's that back and forth kind of workshopping on the idea, or just kind of double checking to make sure everything all the everything lines up. But this one was definitely intended to be a surprise, and was a lot of fun picking that out. For anyone that's seen it, it's a Animal Crossing themed type logo, just very much in the spirit of, and that game came out just as the 1.19 release kicked on and really started up. And then as we've had to go through COVID, as we've had to just endure all these socioeconomic and other natural disasters, just all these crazy things that we've had happen to us around the world. No better time than to focus on one another, really just being upbeat, finding out how you can help one another, and just kind of for joining hands with people and just kind of figuring out how to meet them where they're at, and just to be good, kind, uplifting. And I feel we really did that in 1.19, giving people time, as some weeks were a lot harder than others, taking a break from meetings. Definitely around KubeCon, we took a break there as well, but we really focused on the community in this release. If you overexert the community and the people working on this project, you're not going to have a lot of people left to work on the project if they're all burnt out, right? So it was a lot of fun to work with people on that, and just really actively listen and see what was going on in the community.
Excellent. I just popped up the great kind of artwork there. It's definitely one of my favorite ones. I think everybody's been a little bit Animal Crossing daft this year, so I thought it was a very fitting name, and I think the sentiment that you just described there as well with the release is fantastic as well. So great job, man. Now, I don't want to get this wrong, but I believe that shadow applications are open right now for 1.20. Is that correct?
That's correct. I believe that they're closing up soon. So if you're looking to get your start on Kubernetes and interacting with the open source community, by all means, please check that out. I'll try and find the link. I'll try and retweet that out later. Try to say that 5 times fast, and share that with y'all. But I do believe that's closing up. So and if you have any doubts about getting involved with open source, if you're on the fence, if you're having that if you're undecided on that front, just do it. Obviously make sure you have enough time to do so, but there are rules for everyone. And the biggest piece of feedback that I've heard there is that a lot of people are concerned about being judged, or just they don't really feel comfortable sharing their code or their contributions with the world. That is a lot of scrutiny, but it's you're working with fantastic people, and they're not going to let anything bad happen. So long as you work with people, you have that community mindset, and that's the goal. That's the intent that you're walking in with. You're not going to be disappointed, but by all means, make sure that you have time to do it. I think when I selected the communications team, when I started on that with the Kubernetes release cycles, that role fit really well. But something like CI or CI signal, that one is very involved, and it requires a lot of communication between team members. And so you can kind of pick what works for you, which is really nice about the open source project.
Yeah, I think just to kind of touch on one thing you said there, like you don't even have to write any code, so you don't have to be fearful of writing code. You can join a release team as a shadow and start to experience some of those different roles and positions, and never write a single line of code. I know I've never written a single line of code for the Kubernetes project, so and it's still a very positive experience. I really enjoyed the couple of release teams that I had as a part of too, and plus you get to meet so many cool people and just all those interactions. And even if you are a little bit shy and you're curious or on the fence, you can just go and lurk in the Sig release channel. You can join the mailing list. There are loads and loads of ways where you can get familiar with it first without having to jump straight into the shadow applications. But we will. Sorry, I had to go.
No, it's such a great point, David. I think that it's most open source projects. Yeah, I've felt like that, where it's just like you kind of jump in, you don't really know what to expect. Kubernetes, there's a whole bunch of like role books. There's that shadow process, so you don't have to be like just completely in it, and you have to know everything before you do anything. That's the whole purpose of that shadow program, is so that you can take the time to see how things work and then ramp up until you're at a point where you feel comfortable to take over something in a lead capacity. Typically, we've advised that like 2 cycles of being in a shadow position before getting to that lead position is typically how that works out. But yeah, it's come lurk, come ask questions, come enjoy the banter and the conversation. It's not always about tech. Sometimes we will talk about Animal Crossing. We'll pop up in a Zoom chat on a Friday and just kind of talk about life. Like it's a family, it's a community. It's a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be there's equal parts work and play when it comes to working on Kubernetes, and that makes it a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's great. We will tweet out the links. I'll make sure they're in the comments section as well in the YouTube video. The release team is a great experience. Hopefully we've done it justice. We've sold it really well there. Feel free to get involved. Now we're going to talk about Kubernetes 1.19. So it's got some major themes. Like we've got a list here. Do you want to read through them? Do you want to just dive into each one after one? What's your preferred format here? What would you like to do?
Yeah, so I'd love to kind of hit on a lot of major themes for 1.19, and just kind of if they weren't on your radar, would just kind of love that opportunity to put them on your radar. I'll point out which ones are my personal favorites, but we can just jump through them. So one of the biggest items that happened in 1.19 is increasing the Kubernetes support window to 1 year, whereas previously it was at 9 months, because every 3 months typically you have a new Kubernetes release, and so that allowed for just 2 back as soon as one was published. So now at any given point in time, starting with 1.19, there's going to be 4 that get supported there. There's a lot of feedback from the community saying that it's 9 months is a sizable amount of time. However, would like a little bit more time, so because it is it does get a little bit dizzying to have to upgrade your cluster with every single release that comes out, and most teams aren't able to do that. Some can't do that even within the 9 month period time. So we hear you, we listen to you, and we have 1 year of support. So that's a lot of fun to see.
Yeah, I think that's a change that's going to be welcomed by so many. Kubernetes being such an integral part of people's production infrastructure. Even updating every 3 months can be very daunting, but then getting to the end of a supported release, even scarier. I think that extra bit of buffer time will really help a lot of companies.
It's really going to be fantastic, and I do hope that my selfish want on that one with that feature specifically is some of the managed Kubernetes options that you have. I think that most of them have 1.17 supported right now, but my personal want is to see that a little bit closer to what's gone GA. Like seeing 1.18 just a couple months after it comes out would be great to see. Same with 1.19. Just so that the community is able to kind of work with those features, see if it's good fit for them, and so on. But happy to see that we have those managed clusters available as well. And then for any of you playing at home, I'd absolutely recommend checking out the Kind project by the fantastic Ben the Elder. That allows you to spin up Kubernetes in Docker, Kind, Kind. And it really makes it easy for if you want to test something, work with the control plane, or just kind of spin up, like that. That's how I checked and looked at and started working with a lot of the 1.19 features out of the box, out of the container.
Yeah, kind is definitely the easiest way to start kicking the tires on some of these features, especially even Minikube as well has really good support for both of these. So you can have your shot with any. I think 1.19 was available on both pretty much immediately after the release, which it just makes it so easy for this.
Oh, absolutely agree.
As far, I don't want to ask you an opinion piece so early on in our call, but I'm going to do it anyway. There has been many conversations over the last 12 months about whether Kubernetes, the release cycle is too fast. And corporations and companies are having trouble to speed up. Is that something you see changing maybe in the future? Do you think it will slow down as the project continues to mature, or do you think that maturity will continue to encourage new contributors and maybe speed it up?
That's something I have thought a lot about myself, and I think that I do think that will become the case at some point in time, or we'll separate out into kind of core features, and looking at how the process is set up right now, such that you have you introduce a feature with alpha, you get feedback from the community, and you get that conversation started, then it moves into beta after you have a good backing there, then finally GA on that front. So I like that process, but there have been a lot of conversations that I've been in, both inside of the community and and in the end user community, and there is the stability is constantly becoming a cornerstone to every release that happens for Kubernetes, and being able to there's talks about, like, can we release bug fixes in a different just release that asynchronously along with this core functionality? Will things get broken out into different types of providers, and you like having core functionality and then other different veins to kind of feed that into the project? I'm curious to see if that happens. And then there was one talk that was given at KubeCon San Diego by Tim Pepper and Stephen Augustus, and they talked a lot about we don't really have a distribution of Kubernetes out there right now. We ship the product, but we don't have this distribution with an opinionated, almost like an OS, right? We don't have anything like that. So I think as time goes on, we'll start to see more both distributions or just methods of delivery of what channels are you following for these features, and kind of keeping track of that. I'm really knowing the Kubernetes community, I know they're gonna do it the right way. They're gonna talk with the community before anything happens, but I definitely am tracking that. That's gonna be an interesting one for sure.
All right, keep an eye on that one definitely then. So we've got 12 months. Everyone should be happy. They've got the time that hopefully they need to stay on a supported version. And I think with I think a lot. Here's another. I don't want to segue far too much again, but your previous role to HashiCorp, you said, was at Disney, right? And if I remember correctly, you were an SRE. No?
Correct.
Yeah. Right. Did you run your own Kubernetes clusters?
So mostly we focused on just Disney's a big place, so lots of technology is used. But really, the team that I worked on, we mostly focused on managed Kubernetes. We're using EKS mostly. Before that, that was a long road. We definitely identified Kubernetes as the way we wanted to go, because it allowed us a common language to use between our development teams and our systems teams, and it wasn't like every app wasn't the snowflake or this pet type of configuration that we'd set up. So I liked that we kind of came together as collective teams and decided Kubernetes is our future. We started with the COPS project and tried spinning our own clusters up that way. But when you do that, the open source community is great, but it makes it harder for big organizations to call up and ask questions and kind of get engaged. Again, community is great, but it doesn't give you that support contract, and that's what big enterprises look for. So we went with Rancher for a bit, and using that as well as Terraform to stand up. You'll see why I'm at HashiCorp soon. Love Terraform. But we used Terraform and Rancher to stand up and manage our clusters. So we were hosting our own control planes and hosting our own worker nodes. And that worked really well for a while. but for anyone that's run a control plane in Kubernetes, the etcd data store, if you're running that through any abstraction, you might have some problems from time to time, just as life happens and comes at you. So we saw some issues there, and just being able to kind of delegate away all of those etcd and control plane problems and scaling issues to Amazon was a very good move for our teams. And so we really enjoyed that. But that's mostly what we would use. And then that would give us the time. It was a little bit behind the current releases that were out. And so taking that time to be aware of, like in 1.16, there were a lot of API changes. Taking the time to work through those and have the time to adjust was really nice. And so again, that's why I'm excited about that 1 year time cycle for some of the bigger end users and people that aren't able to quickly change everything over just because of the scale and the size that they're working at.
Yeah, I'll just echo some of your points there. But every production outage I've ever had of a Kubernetes cluster has either been kubedns or etcd. So if you're fortunate enough to be able to use one of the managed services, then definitely you should be using that. And if not, this cluster API, which maybe we'll talk about later. So back on track now, right? I'm going to try not to kind of segue far too much, but the next major theme on the Kubernetes release blog was the storage capacity tracking. What's that?
So I'm going to lump these two. I'm reading ahead. So there were a lot of really interesting features added, in alpha state in this release. So there was storage capacity tracking, generic ephemeral volumes, and CSI volume health monitoring. All of this really being that, the expectation of Kubernetes clusters and those use cases were kind of assuming that you had infinite availability to storage or just volumes that you would actually use to store things in. Just overall storage. The thought was that was infinite. Now we're able to, with the CSI in place, container storage interface, we have the ability to be a little bit more intelligent at looking at, they're like, I'll just talk about Amazon just because that's where that's where I have a lot of experience. So when you take a look at, EBS volumes versus EFS versus kind of all those storage classes that you have, you also have like the I nodes, and those have really fast local disk storage, the NVIe, I believe. And so you're not able to really leverage those volumes because you're either dealing with block storage. You're not really too focused on that local storage on that machine. I can't remember which Kubernetes release it was, but I know that once that was kind of pointed out to the community, they said, hey, can we just make use of the disk that we actually have hosting on these machines? And so that was added in. So this allows us to be a little bit more direct when it comes to how do we divvy up our storage classes, and how do we actually look at storage. So these three features have really set us up for success in the future for identifying different types of storage classes instead of just throwing an EBS volume on everything, which is quite nice. The health monitoring is also really good too, because then you can actually see when that volume gets mounted to that machine and so on and so forth. So a little bit better reporting on that front too, which is quite helpful, because troubleshooting things troubleshooting things without a lot of information becomes very difficult.
Oh yeah, definitely, that's for sure. So those three features then are the storage capacity tracking, which exposes metrics about the utilization of the different CSI and block devices, etc. that we have. I think the feature you mentioned there, was that the local provisioner from 1.17, I think, that allowed you to actually access the bare metal disk, if I can remember correctly.
Exactly.
And then the second storage one there is the generic ephemeral volumes. What does that allow me to do then from a Kubernetes point of view?
So what that allows you to do is kind of have like a working disk. So if you have something that you don't want, that is ephemeral, that you don't need around for a long time, and you don't want to use that local machine's volume, at that point in time, you can kind of give it a different disk than the root disk, and then do whatever operations you might need to with that, and then kind of throw it away, which is kind of nice. So it's a Scratchpad essentially.
Okay, so if I have a Kubernetes deployment and I want to leverage some of the CSI implementations, but for ephemeral things, I can't even think, like, say I wanted to store my logs, but not on the bare metal disk, but on a CSI implementation, then I could request an ephemeral volume from that provider.
Exactly. Yeah, and you might have different needs. If you might need something with higher IOPS or something like that, so you can get that quick, burstability, have it be ephemeral, and then chuck it once you're done with it.
Okay, I think I get that now. The last one that we were talking about there was the CSI volume health monitoring. So how does that hook in then to those last two features, and what am I getting on top there?
So what that'll tell you is so the storage capacity tracking, that just kind of lets you know, like, hey, you're really leveraging this volume over here. It might not make sense because you have a lot of disk pressure. You might not want to put things over there. The CSI volume health monitoring, what that really allows you to do is just kind of get a sense into the events that are going on. So if you have a Ceph cluster, if you have EBS volumes, you can kind of keep track of where they're at and how they're doing. So if you have machine go offline, you're going to want to know about that. If for anyone that's used EBS volumes, those are locked to one availability zone, and so that kind of makes things difficult when you want to have say a Mongo DB cluster, and if that goes down, and you need to bring it up into another AZ, you can't. You have to stay in that same AZ. You can fix that with EFS, which is multi-AZ, but you're still going to want to have metrics on getting that rescheduled. I've had nightmares and real life experiences with EBS volumes, and it taking upwards of like 4 or 5 minutes to rejoin a machine and to reconnect. And so having a little bit more tooling on, where is this volume? How is this, what's going on? And having some more error codes to source from, make that a little bit easier experience too, so that you can kind of tune and set up the cluster exactly the way that you'd want when it comes to volumes.
Nice. So 1.19 is a pretty good release then as far as stateful applications and storage go then. Oh,
absolutely.
Do you have any strong opinions on running stateful applications on Kubernetes?
I've been there. I feel the pain when it comes to supporting, stateful applications. I've been lucky enough that a lot of the applications I've worked with have been stateless, so not too much of a concern. I've run, though, conversely, I've run Elasticsearch, I've run MongoDB. I've played around with running Postgres. I'll typically pull down RDS or something like that, but definitely worked with Postgres in a Helm chart. And I really like that you're able to do things like that, but it just is, it's something that you have to think about is, are you okay with that? Because you will run into problems. You absolutely will, no matter how much tooling is available to you. Managed services are always easier to set up and to have managed, because they're managed services, and you have support. You can call people and work with them on that front. But it's an extra layer that you really have to think about. You have to think about if that were to go down. You have to think about your backup process. You have to think about and do disaster recovery scenarios. So if you're able to do that, I'm all for it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And it's a lot of fun because you don't normally get that level of insight into the types of workloads and applications that you support. But at the same point in time, that is a lot of, that can be a very big time sink. And if you're a smaller team, that becomes a little bit harder to do. So smaller teams or teams that support a lot of applications, I definitely lean towards suggesting a managed service. Otherwise, stateful sets. Let's go. Let's learn some things, because that can be beneficial too. That's its own payment kind of plan.
Yeah, I think either you've been extremely lucky in your career, or I'm a bit of a masochist. But all the databases you mentioned there are distributed by default. Like MongoDB, already handles data working across multiple nodes. Whereas I seem to have been very unlucky in my career and work with databases that do not support that, which makes my life a lot more painful, difficult, fun. Let's go with fun.
Maybe at some point in time we can do some live coding and get like a cockroach DB cluster set up and something that's supposed to be easy and support SQL native calls. Maybe we can find some middle ground between us at some point in time.
Well, yeah, definitely. I'd be up for that session for sure. Because I mean, I work for a bare metal company, which means there are no managed services. So even though I've never worked with a distributed database previously, I'm now working for a company that doesn't offer managed services. So maybe it's masochism is my thing. Okay, so volumes are cool. I really love that. I think anything that makes stateful applications on Kubernetes easier for people to consume is fantastic. Now, the next one on this list that we have shocked me a little bit, and I don't know if I'm just being really naive or not, but Ingress graduates to general availability. Was that not generally available?
Right. I'm not kidding you. Despite being, this, taxicab confession. Yeah, I thought the same thing. Walking into the 1.19 release, I had a double take the first time I saw it. I was like, wait a minute, what? It was a Gmail beta, type. We're getting rid of the beta. It's like, wait a minute, that was beta. Type moment for sure. When I can't remember and forgive me, I'm still booting up with some caffeine here, but I can't remember which Kubernetes enhancement proposal it was, but there was one about kind of reevaluating and looking at that alpha, beta, GA type classifications, because we would have the situation where something would go into, it's a chicken and egg problem. When you have something go into alpha, you've got it into Kubernetes. That's fantastic. But most of the time, it's hidden behind a feature flag that you'll have to enable or pass to the kubelet, and then that will get supported. And with anything alpha, it doesn't really scream production. No, nor should you in many cases, unless you're knowingly, you've accepted the risks and you're testing out a new feature. Never turn on alpha. That's my recommendation. I think any lawyer is going to back that up too. So we get into this situation where all of these new alpha features are really cool. Like, look at the ones that we're talking about. They sound fantastic. But if you don't have that beta or higher type of certainty that it's actually going to go live at some point in time, you don't have a lot of certainty. And that's what we like when we're working with infrastructure. So the language was changed there, and just kind of that process, because a lot of people would come forward and say, hey, I have this thing in alpha. Can we just move it to beta, because that will get people to use it? People are, typically not jumping to use alpha features. So that makes it hard to move to that beta stage. Even if there is that level of interest, it can still be pretty difficult. So the language and just kind of that overall process was changed. Again, I can't remember the KEP that one was around, but that's why the Ingress, working as it was, it just needed some final things to push it across the finish line so that we could deem it as stable in GA, and then start working with the community on more features. So that's one I'm very excited about. It's one of my personal favorites, along with the longer support time. Is the Ingress finally moves to GA. Woo!
Yeah, I think it's one of those one of those things that, because I'm going to get this wrong, we are just so conditioned, I feel, as users of Kubernetes to V1 beta 1, that to me that was GA, like, because we just had all those APIs for so long. And of course now we've got V1, but I just always assumed that Ingress was one of those objects that was just available. I mean, every Kubernetes cluster I've had for years now has used Ingress, and I never once thought for a second it was something that was in beta. So
same, and it worked so well. It's worked so well. So it's just like Gmail did for 11 years, I think it was, before it went GA. It's Ingress did everything you needed it to.
Yeah, and at least, yeah, you're right. It's always worked, so it's fine. It's good. And I think, yeah, it's nice for people to understand how that new feature thing works, from KEP to alpha to beta and to GA. And I think you've kind of covered that complete journey of a KEP, which is nice and cool. And Ingress is now GA. You can start using it, I guess, if you weren't already. I think they changed the namespace as well. Was that this release or the previous one? I can't remember now. But I think that's when I first realized that things weren't as I always expect them to be. Cool. So we've got two more, we've got three more, but there's two more that I think we're probably going to group together now. The next two major themes are structured logging and the klog methods. What are those?
Yes. So structured logging is going to be fantastic because, well, it is. It's really fantastic because it allows us now to get standard logs out of Kubernetes. We could do things with standard out and standard error, and that made it easy when we had a log aggregation layer in our stack, like Elasticsearch or something else. And then, but it did become kind of a pain point when we started indexing those logs, and because you were never really you got logs, but they just weren't in a similar format. So that indexing became difficult, and then sourcing what data you actually needed to see became difficult. That mutating those logs downstream before you put them into your logging cluster, that becomes an issue. So finally, there's a feature now where we actually have everything time stamped, and then you have like a logical standard out and standard error to actually source from. We'll kind of go through a quick demo on that one and here in a little bit, but you'll just be able to see those lines are now different because they start with that timestamp and it's just in a standard format. So even if you advise your teams to log in JSON or anything else, if you're just doing line by line type of logging, that's going to be consistent now, and you don't need to worry so much about that or making crazy regular expressions to deal that and to capture those. I'm sure everyone agrees with me that there's better time spent than on regular expressions. Apologies to those of you that really enjoy it.
I have wasted so much of my life writing regex and grok parsers for Logstash and Telegraph and all these other tools, but just emitting it as JSON is it just makes everything so much easier. I think the way that we consume all of these logs, and like I said, we're going to do a demo in a few minutes. People will hopefully just see right away the power that we get, the flexibility that we're going to get from this approach.
I had spoilers. I was not able to get the thing I really like. I just haven't been able to replicate on that front with the logging is that output in JSON. But so I'll show you what just regular standard out and error looks like. But being able to, once you're able to tap into that JSON, this feature, both those features are in alpha now. But being able to work with that and see that get to GA is so exciting because like David said, lost years of my life, and I don't see any right now, but at least like 15 gray hairs that will be coming out from regular expressions alone, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I don't want to make any naive assumptions, but it's more formality, right, for structured logging to go in as an alpha just because it's a new feature. I don't really see what would hold that up from graduating to beta and stable, other than formality of process, right?
Exactly. Well, it's just kind of that steep time, just time to work with the community, and then that new klog method they've given, the community, the project, that with that feature, you're able to kind of take your time and then kind of lean everything over into that new logging library, such that you can really leverage it. Despite what's coming out of the logs as it is right now.
Sweet, awesome. I'm looking forward to playing with that. All right, we've got one more thing on our super duper list, which is the kubelet client TLS certificate rotation.
So this one is really cool. Really should have made my list. I don't know why I haven't talked more about it, but I think mostly because it's been something that we've been used to and that has kind of been done, behind the scenes, and that is the kubelet client TLS certificate rotation. So that did happen in the past, but that was happening within outside of the cluster mechanism. So with this feature that's gone GA, that finally is brought into the cluster so that as needed, the control plane can kind of roll those client certificates. And it's just not something that you need to think about. So when the kubelet calls in and it needs that new one, it's just a lot more seamless. You reduce that level of latency, and everything just works. Trademark.
There, you heard it from Taylor himself. Everything is just going to work.
Just like, I have to go. See you later.
So what we've covered, I'll just share my screen here, is pretty much the majority of this article, which is the release article, It just tells you what's new. At the bottom, we do have a couple of things that we haven't touched on, and some of them are quite important. So the first one is that the Seccomp integration has now graduated to stable. Assuming things go well, we will take a look at that and how that works, moving away from the old annotation approach to the new actual pod spec level stuff, which is really cool. And I'm not sure if there's anything else here that you want to quickly run over, like the run multiple scheduling profiles. I mean, that sounds kind of important, but I don't think I fully understand it. Is that something you're comfortable talking about?
I think with most of these, so I'm still working through a lot of these myself and just kind of trying to find, I'm having a lot of aha moments after the release, getting to kind of see these things worked through, see the tests that, they've been put through in Prow. But it's still working on quite a few of these and how they apply to my workloads. But so none that I could talk to you right now is the TLDR, but very excited too.
Yeah, well, I mean, all of these are links to the caps and issues, so people can obviously go. If anything there piques your interest, then feel free to go click on it and take a look at it. The other thing we are going to take a look at today, however, is the immutable secrets and config maps, which hopefully we can get that working and show you how cool that is, or painful, depending on your prerogative. And another one I really like, which is listed as a major change, but I think it's been graduating over the last couple of releases, is the node topology manager, which actually allows you to do rack and data center aware service reading, which is really, really cool too. And maybe something that we will touch on another day. Okay, I think it's time to get hands-on. You feeling brave?
Always.
All right, so
look, I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a character flaw, but
it's a good thing. It's a good thing. Okay, so we're going to do the immutable secrets and config maps, Seccomp GA, and structured logging. Do you have a preference of what you would like to start with?
I could kick it off with, so if you wouldn't mind grabbing the immutable secrets and Seccomp, I can kick it off kind of easy breezy with some structured logging for sure.
All right, let's do it.
Cool. Let me share my screen and click the right buttons, and then we should be there. All right, so everyone should see my terminal. Let me get that at a decent size for everyone. So I have spun up, actually, let me get rid of this.
That's brave.
I'd say like I'm going to delete things with you live. Okay, so the kind project that I talked about a little bit earlier is really fantastic because it allows for you to spin up a local Kubernetes cluster. So I'm actually going to cat out this configuration. So I was working a little bit earlier with the Seccomp, which I've happily hot potatoed over to David for one of our next demos, but you can see that I'm able to specify the 1.19 release here, and then working with some of those profiles, you can see that there are different arguments and ways in which you can define this when you're spinning up your Kubernetes cluster. Please note that up here in a role, that's actually going to be the different machines, virtual machines here that I'm going to be spinning up and working with. So a huge thank you to the team that manages Kind. It really makes it easy when you're working with local workloads, in addition to things like Minikube and Docker for Mac, Windows, Linux, and spinning up those Kubernetes cluster. But the benefit here is that it makes it very easy to go ahead and grab the latest version there. So I've deleted that out. I'm going to do Kind, and let's create a cluster. Also like the tooling just because it's, all the command line items just make a lot of sense. I also do very much like the emojis. You can see here, this is an image. You got machines here with the nodes, the package. I really like that. As you configuration, you got a scroll. Control plane, you have game controller, fantastic. But I think I figured out most of these, but I'm not 100% sure. But we'll see. We'll see how well my skills of relation are as we go through this. But the good thing about this too is that it doesn't really take that much time. I think it's the control plane step, and when it joins the worker nodes to that control plane, that's like when you're waiting for 20, 30 seconds. It's typically not that long. So hopefully you don't have to eat my shoe after saying that. But So yeah, you have CNI, storage class, this worker nodes. This takes just a little bit of time. But then it writes that kube config to your local file system, and you don't need to worry about that either. So once this is done, I'll kind of just show you that we have a working cluster, and then I'm just going to tail the logs to core DNS to show you what those standard logs look like. Cool. So we have a cluster. A couple things for those of you following along at home. I've aliased the kube control just to K. So if you see me type in K, I might bounce back and forth depending on the commands, but that's my alias and setup. I also use two tools. One is kube context and kube namespace, and that just makes it a little bit easier for me to switch between clusters. Because I'll typically manage quite a few. So if we go ahead and we take a look at the nodes, kind switches over that context to the cluster that you just spun up, so you don't need to switch to it, which is kind of nice. So we can see that we have 4 machines here. One is the control plane, and then we have these worker machines here. If I jump into kube system here, make it a little bit easier for me to get these pods and see what's up. So we can see we have our whole control plane here. And say I want to go ahead and take a look at this. I don't want to define that. Get out of here. I want to take a look at the logs here and follow along. We can see that here are some of the errors. That's not so hot, but I'm assuming everything's working now. We can see that we have timestamps, and then we have these just the regular body of the message. Beforehand, you would get just separate pieces of information and data. But if let's take a look at another pod. Let's take a look at this one. But you can see here, now everything is standard in the fact that we can always rely on that timestamp being first, and then getting that downstream data in the body of that message later. Again, I apologize, was not able to get the JSON view up for this. I think there's a couple flags I needed to double check and take a look at my setup. But you are able to export this as JSON if you specify the right commands, and that's going to obviously be a lot easier to kind of look through and then filter on as you're trying to tail logs and things like that. So really excited to see how this evolves over time, and as we're able to filter on, like, I only want to see error logs, and the biggest one being that it's so difficult to kind of link together if you have a deployment that's 3 pods, to kind of tile those logs together so that you get a comprehensive view as to what's going on without having to stand up your own logging cluster. So that's structured logging.
Nice. And because I am feeling brave and I have been working on the JSON stuff, I'm going to give that a go. So, yes. And I'm using Minikube instead of Kind. Oh, and I'm not feeling good because I can't even spell. I will feel brave and delete mine.
Yes.
And so the way this would work, if I'm feeling particularly brave, hold on. Let's jump over here. So I have I guess he's maybe too brave, but I've been working on a branch of Minikube to make this a bit easier. So let's look at what this would work. Let's look at how this would work normally. So is that big enough? Hold on, there we go. So Minikube allows you to pass -- extra config, which allows you to specify extra parameters that can go to each of the Kubernetes components. So what I can do here is I can say that I want to pass something to the kubelet, and the key that I want to modify is going to be the logging format. And I can specify that as JSON like so. Unfortunately, to do that for every component requires doing this and saying, hey, let's do the scheduler too. And then I'd have to do what else? There would be the API server, there would be the proxy, there would be core DNS. Like, that line would get super painful. And I'm a very lazy developer. So what I started doing was this ability where we could just specify -- logging format equals JSON. And you'll see that I've added some crappy characters to the end because I actually don't know how to write tests for Minikube, so I wanted to make sure it didn't work as well. And that was the way that I did it. So you can see here that it just says, hey, this is not a supported login format. So let's just do that again with JSON. Now, Minikube should take, I mean, that looked bad, but I'm going to assume it's going to be okay. It should just take, oh, it's not okay. Let's do a delete. Maybe I had one cluster and a half setup state there. If that doesn't work, I'll spin up the old school way. But it should just take roughly about 1 minute, maybe a little bit less, to get us a working node. And what we'll see following on, that we can already see the parameters being added now to the different components, so the scheduler, the kubelet, the controller manager, and the API server. And we should be able to pull out those logs, much in the same way that Taylor did, only ours will be in a JSON representation. The cool thing about that is it's going to be really easy for that to be parsed by Logstash, Elasticsearch, Telegraph, Vector, whatever tooling you have in your setup. Cool. It didn't crash this time, so I'm happy. So if I run, I do not have the fancy tool like you do, kube namespace. But I could do k-n kube system, and I'm going to pull out the API server logs. And when I do that, it's not JSON. So that's my, that just means that my fork didn't work. So let's just quickly do this the old way then. And I'll just do the API server. That was really unfortunate. I was so confident that was good.
I swear it's as soon as you do a live demo, that's there's something that happens. You lose your magical powers. Don't know what it is, but yeah, being alone, you know, and just that solitude, that focus, really really brings it out of the demo.
Yeah, I don't know what I did wrong there because I have tested this. Did I pull the wrong kube API server? And I did enable it on the API server. Oh well, it doesn't matter. So what I did there is API server. Now if this doesn't work again, that means the API server just ignored it. Oh, it did. Okay. So you can see here, we now actually have JSON for every single line. And if I just pick that on a cleanup pipe to JQ, well, we have JSON. It's easy to parse. I can use other tools with it. Much good. And that's it. Structured logging is not one of those things that has a substantial amount of change. I think most of the changes came from reusing the different klog methods within the instrumentation. But nice, good. I'm not going off script anymore. I'm not brave. I'm not at 6:30 on a Monday. Okay, so structured logging, very cool. We like it, and we're looking forward to see tools take advantage of that and store logs with good debugging stuff. What did we say was next?
What is next? I think it was the. I'm not sure if you want to save the. This one should be pretty easy. Immutable secrets and config maps.
Yes, right. Okay. So let's pop open VS Code and let's deploy. No, we're not doing a pub. We're doing a ConfigMap. And we'll call this RTFM, and we can just have any arbitrary value like so. Now, I guess we should just show, maybe talk about how this works currently without making any modifications, because I don't think people really understand what happens and why this is a bit of a pain point. So if we do apply this, then we can do kube. I'm in Bash, and now I'm not getting my alias. But, get ConfigMap RTFM. If I modify this value, in fact, I didn't show the value. You can see here key is 15345. Now, if I change this and reapply it, and I run get, we have this updated value. Now, that can be considered good or bad depending on what you're doing with your Kubernetes cluster. So I'll speak from my own experience, and then maybe you want to chip in with how you feel. I don't think I don't know if we'll both have the same opinion or not. But there's this weird thing that everyone in their Kubernetes journey has to deal with at some point, and that's where you make a modification to a config map. You have running pods inside of your cluster, and there's actually no notification or event that tells that pod that it needs to restart because the configuration changed. And this is so common that there are a lot of Helm charts now that will actually put an annotation on the pod spec with the SHA of the config to force that thing to change. But the other school of thought is that config maps shouldn't change anyway, and that you should always deploy a new config map and then with a new deployment that consumes it, or an updated deployment that consumes it. Is that kind of in line with your experience as well?
Oh, absolutely. It's when you have something, especially when you follow like, you know, a GitOps type methodology, where what you see in that repository, or like when you set up a cluster and app something, you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have something that is static so that you can reproduce it. If you have a config map that's mutating or changing, secrets that are mutating or changing, you don't get that level of certainty. And so that makes it kind of difficult to troubleshoot, to reproduce issues that happen, things of that nature. And this also, say this were, you know, a Bitcoin wallet, and I found out what David's was, I could quickly change that, and then, you know, we could use his money instead of mine, and you wouldn't want that, would you?
No. So I guess, yeah, and just to kind of really cement why this was a problem is that if some of your pods in your deployment, if you've got 20 pods and some of them restart, they could be consuming an older version of the config, and some could be modifying the new version. And if you've actually applied 3, 4, or 5 changes to your config map for whatever crazy thing you're doing, all of your pods could, in theory, be running a different configuration. Really weird. We had a comment, I think someone noticed the error with my Minikube, by the way. It was that I possibly wasn't actually using my locally compiled one, but I'm not going back to it. I'll hopefully get that pull request merged and everyone else can play with it. So 1.19 gives us this new thing. And it should, I'm going to say should, be as simple as adding a new key to the config map that says this is immutable. Okay, so we now have that configured. If I just pull this back down, you know, I've never actually modified an mutable config map to be immutable. So let's see if this breaks or not. But you can see here we have the value immutable true, and the value is 678. Now, if I've done this correctly and I decide that this should now be ABC 123, when I apply this, we should get an error message that says you cannot modify this config map. Ah, it worked.
Yes.
So it's one of those really small changes. The API surface is really small, what immutable true is done. But I think the quality of life for people that are consuming and using Kubernetes, and the deterministic nature now that a deployment and a config map will always be in sync, is really, really important to people. At least I think this will be a very welcomed addition to the API, for sure.
Absolutely agree. And secrets are just as easy too. All you need to add is that immutable true flag, and you're good to go. But definitely agree with David on that front. It's even figuring out, you know, what is a secret in Kubernetes, what is, you know, worthy of putting into ConfigMap. And at the end of the day, that's typically like anything you're okay with seeing in plain text is usually a pretty good smell test, you know, before you actually put it in there as well. So, you know, credit card's not a good config map entry to put in there.
No. All right, we got 2 follow-ups in the chat there. So the first one being, another big issue is if you have a config map managed in a separate repository, it's a pain because there's no Kubernetes native event yet. So that's just reaffirming that deployment situation. And I think the use case here is if you've got like a platform GitOps repository that provides loads of environment information, and then your applications are deployed separately, there's no way to connect the dots between that config map changing and what's in the cluster. But yeah, it is a huge problem. Immutable config maps just remove that because you always have to deploy a new one and update the surrounding thing. So yeah, I think it's cool. The other question was, can we delete an immutable config map? Yes, he says confidently. I did do this earlier, so it's gone. And there's nothing there to stop you deleting it. There's no protections from. There's nothing there to stop you deleting something that's going to be consumed by anything. So yeah, that's a challenge. You're going to end up with pods in a fail to restart container create loop if you delete one that is needed. but at least you can be sure the content's all very good. Yes.
Absolutely. There was one edit too, because even though, like we had said before, David pointed out the fact that when you change a config map, that doesn't automatically restart all of your pods, unless you have some out of band tooling that handles that. But Kubernetes native does not give you that type of experience. However, Kubernetes keeps track of, hey, this config map was updated, right? Because it has to store that state. And so when you mark it as immutable, Kubernetes gets that very, and I believe in most cases, very small performance gain where it doesn't keep checking to see if that config map has been updated because it knows it can't be. So there's also that like hidden benefit as well. At the end of the day, I'm not sure how much performance it's going to net you, but just something that's cool. Might be a good trivia question or something to pay attention to with all the cloud trivia that we've seen this.
Yeah, so that's a really actually good point, because what you've just said has now put in a bit of ambiguity into the problem domain that I was mentioning. So I think we should let's just clear this up. Now, the config maps are, if I get this wrong, please correct me. When they're exposed as environment variables or files, so files and environment variables are updated within the pod. The challenge is the process running normally doesn't know to take advantage of the reload, which is why you end up with multiple processes consuming old information. It's not that Kubernetes doesn't update the file or the environment variable. That's right, yeah.
Exactly.
Cool. And I think what we should just do now is show off one other thing, because I'm sure there'll be a question on it later. But what if I deploy this as immutable and want to make it mutable? I was going to say unimmutable, and I would have just left it like that. So we now have an immutable config map, and if I remember correctly, you cannot then make it mutable. This will not work. Okay, so if you make a config map immutable, there is no undoing it to do inline or hot updates. You always have to create a new config map. But I can do it, so let's get rid of it.
That reminds me of Slack channels, how you can make it private, but you can't then turn a private channel back into a public one, which also makes sense.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I don't think there's anything else to cover on the immutability here. I think we've pretty much covered every potential edge case in question. So that means we have to move on to the difficult bit then, right? So we're going to talk about let's close that. The promotion of the Seccomp API. Was it generally available? Yeah, I think it was.
Yes.
So I cheated. I have downloaded a Seccomp profile. I am not brave enough to try and put that together during a live stream. And this is for Nginx. What is really cool is if you deploy the Seccomp operator, this profile is actually provided for you. I'm not going to show the Seccomp operator today. There's a stream on that last week. Feel free to check it out. What we're going to look at today is just the raw Kubernetes aspect of it, working with the API directly. So what does that mean we need? We need a deployment. See this VS Code extension where you never have to actually type the YAML. I don't even know if I could type a deployment YAML anymore.
Wow. So I'm just noticing I need to add that and save myself hours of time. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah. So let's remove the resources. I don't need the port, but I'm just, because it'll annoy me, I'll add the port. Now, what happens here is I can deploy this Nginx resource. It's like any normal resource, assuming I don't get anything wrong. Oh, I'm applying the JSON. Because I called it deployment. There we go. Which means I can now do kube control get pods. Let's just give that a second. It's going to be pulling down the Nginx image. I'll run it on a watch. Of course, it's running. And now I can do exec Nginx, not in my real shell, so I can't get autocomplete. And let's hit the Nginx container, and I can drop back in. Nothing exciting there, all standard stuff. However, there is a certain attack vector without specifying a Seccomp profile And that is, if a malicious actor somehow manages to get within the process, can they execute commands that we do not want them to execute? Like me getting inside of a pod seems harmless, but the ability to get inside of that namespace could be potentially dangerous. Right? So we can use the Seccomp profile here, which lists all of the syscalls that Nginx is expected to make and restricts it. So what we have to do is copy this, and then if I do minikube SSH, so you have to be on each of the hosts or the nodes, and you have to put in a file. I'm going to have to root, and we're going to add a directory to the kubelet configuration. So that is where all the kubelet config lives. We can create a new directory called seccomp profiles. And I need to do an apt update and install them because I'm not going to have it. I just realized. So magic stuff happens. Saying my internet's not too bad. And we can go inside seccomp profiles. Now from here, I can create nginx.json, paste that, and leave it alone. So this would obviously be part of your configuration management setup. You would have Terraform, write this file, or SaltStack, or Puppet, whatever you're using, put all of your profiles into a single location on each of your workers so they can be consumed by the pods. Or you can use the seccomp operator, which does all that for you. Anyway, now we want to restrict the syscalls that Nginx can make. And to do that, these changes to the API leverage the security context API. So this already exists. It allows you to do things like what? Force the UID, the GID, I think there's a few other things. But now we can specify seccomp profile, and we have a type. So this is where I'm going to start getting into territory that I'm not entirely comfortable with, but I'll try and remember it. There are localhost types and container runtime type. Runtime, I think it's runtime default. The documentation is going to have that covered. But this is a profile that ships with your CRI implementation, which tries to remove some of the more dangerous syscalls, like privilege escalation and such. But it's not really specific to applications you're going to run. For that, we have to tell it to use a local host, which is going to use the profiles in the directory we just provisioned. And then we can tell it which profile we want to use. Now, assuming I've not messed this up, which is extremely likely, I should be able to do profiles nginx.json, and that path is just profiles here, the directory that I created, and the nginx.json here. And we can apply that. So I'll drop out of my minikube SSH. We'll do kube control apply and redo the deployment. No, we won't. Oh, drop out of root, drop out of minikube. Now I can do it. All right. Okay. Now, if I've not messed this up, I should be able to run get pods and see the pod running. Good. And we can confirm that it has done what we expect. So describe pods, pod name, and then we'll just grep for account. You can see here, we are running this Nginx profile. And what that means is, I'm going to use the pod name again, that if I try and exec inside of this, it fails. Good. So what happened there is this syscall get p process group, I think that is the syscall, failed because our seccomp profile doesn't allow Nginx to run that syscall, and I can now no longer get in a container. The good thing about that is if someone were able to exploit an Nginx vulnerability or CVE to get inside of that container, the chances of them being able to execute any commands that would potentially allow them to get back down to the host should hopefully be null and void. Hopefully. I think that's it. Like, the API surface is nice and small. Unfortunately, writing Seccomp profile is really difficult. Go to Google, try and find ones that other people have written. But the application from a Kubernetes point of view could not be simpler. So, a couple of lines on the security context and you're good to go. Is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think just very much agreeing with you that writing a Seccomp profile is at least right now difficult. I definitely want to learn more on that front as well. I think I'd feel more comfortable writing an autobiography before a Seccomp profile as it stands today. But no, absolutely, it's 1.19 is fun. Go check it out. If you have any questions about features, please feel free to reach out. If there's any, demos or you feel like there's a blog entry that's needed or tutorials, things like that, hit us up. And it's kind of fun to see what people are using to talk through those work streams and those workflows and just get a sense as to what everybody's interested in. Let's have a conversation.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. This is really good to just kind of sit down and go through some of the new features, understand how they work and dig into them a little bit more. So thank you.
Thanks for having me. No, this was a blast. Hope y'all have a wonderful rest of your Monday. And yeah, thanks for hanging out with us.
All right. Thanks again, Taylor. I'll speak to you soon. Bye all.
Thank you.